but welcome. So I have some scripted notes. You'll find out once I settle into myself and get less nervous that I won't, But in the beginning, some of these things that I kind of need to read and reference are very critical. We want to thank our partners today, okay? So the Early Learning Coalition of Orange County, the Central Florida Foundation, Orlando Health, the National Association of Social Workers, and the Cameron Fareed Foundation for their financial support in helping to make today possible. And of course, we all know that's very important. Let's give them a round of applause. Welcome to our distinguished guests who are here with us today. They may not be yet in the room, but let's announce them. Commissioner Regina Hill of the 5th District will be here with us today. Where is Commissioner Hill? Is she here? She'll be here. Commissioner Samuel Ains of the... Was he here yet, Commissioner Ains? He will be here with us today. Commissioner Sarah Sprinkle of Winter Park will be with us today. There she is. There she is. I want you to know, so this is getting us excited, right? Because frankly, if the elected officials are in the room, that's good. Because government helps us make things happen, right? So also, representatives from Marco Rubio's office are here today, which is wonderful. And Peggy Gustav from the office of Congresswoman Val Demings. Is Peggy here? Where is she? She'll be here this morning. And also, any other elected officials? Are there other elected officials in the room that would like to stand up and, well, I know we got a big one here in the front, but I'm gonna introduce him. Any other elected officials that want to stand and be recognized? Okay, let's just give all of our elected officials a round of applause and appreciation. Thank you for being here. For those of us in the room who've been working with the science of ACEs and integrating trauma-informed practices, we know how important this work is to the health of our community. And to bring so many people together from such sectors under one roof. This is funny. I don't usually write scripts. You'll find out. Representing diverse sector groups is an important step. Where's Karen Willis? Is she here? Is Karen here yet? There she is. We would not be here today without Karen Willis, who, when I said to her, we're thinking about doing some work around ACEs at Valencia College, looking at trauma and healing, and are you interested? And boy, was she interested. And after that lunch, that afternoon, I had all these emails from her community partners saying, yes, 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 we're in. We had a meeting January 21st. First, Dr. Kevin Sheeran was there in the room. Many of you all know the work of Dr. Sheeran, and he said, we need a conference with 500 people in the room of all different sectors to have this conversation together about ACEs. He was, I will say, giddy that someone was going to do this. And I remember thinking to myself, that all sounds good, but 500 people? I don't know. I don't know how we could do it. Remember, that was January 21. Did y'all hear me say that? And here we are, as the registrations continued and grew. We registered 567 people for this conference. And we had to turn many people away still. So it's been incredible. And so the support from some of our community leaders you will hear from today, and one of them I'm going to introduce now, and it is Mayor Buddy Dyer. And what I want to say about the mayor is I really do feel his true heart in the work that many of us bring to him. Like, right, a lot of us show up at his office, right, and say, get behind us, get behind us, get behind us. And you know what? He does. Because there is a real care. And he is here today, and he is willing to once again open his heart and his mind to something that a lot of us in this room believe could change the trajectory of wellness in our community. So here he is, our mayor of the city of Orlando, Mayor Buddy Dyer.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning to everyone. And thank you for being here this morning. This is awesome to have so many people here to start this very important dialogue. I appreciate Valencia College's Peace and Justice Institute Of course, the Early Learning Coalition of Orange County Health Department, and all of the partners and sponsors that are here this morning. And we all know that Orlando and the Central Florida community are no strangers to trauma. From the Pulse tragedy, which is coming up on the third-year anniversary on June the 12th, to the impacts of domestic violence, which we all know so well. But collectively, we're resilient when we're united, and we're at our best when we are collaborative. You will not ever hear me speak without talking about collaboration and partnership. And being a healing and trauma-informed community is without question collaborative work. So that's what we're here to do this morning, is to collaborate. Today we begin with education on adverse childhood experiences, or ACE. I didn't know that term till about a week ago, I suppose, when I was looking at my calendar on what I had for this week, and I didn't realize I was going to spend every morning with Joel Hunter this week, but I love that. We're going to learn how to develop a more trauma-informed and healing community, and we need everybody involved. I saw law enforcement here today, healthcare, educators, mental health professionals, business people, not-for-profits, and government too. So we need to work to create strong and resilient families and children, and it's everyone's business. We're very honored to have Dr. Vincent Follette here today. His work is pioneering research that has led to a much deeper understanding of the impacts of early childhood adversity across the entire lifespan. It's kind of intuitive to know that if you grow up in adverse situations, it's going to affect you as you grow up and probably through your adult life. But he's actually done the research to tell you how that affects someone. 3 quick examples on other communities that have been engaged in this type of work. Elementary school in San Diego stopped suspending and expelling students, and the students' grades, test scores, and attendance increased significantly. The work that was done in Pueblo, Colorado resulted in a health clinic seeing a 30% drop in emergency room visits, and in Wisconsin, they saw a state decline in the number of people quitting their jobs from 21% to 3%. So verifiable impacts in different communities. And I know working together, we can have that same type of impact here. Thank you for your commitment to community resilience and healing. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning. Come on, we can do better than that. Good morning. I am Will Jefferson. I serve as the community manager for the Peace and Justice Institute. And now that we are entering into the first month with a command, March, how promising is it that we will fill a room with participants ready to do that exact order? We're getting ready to have deep conversations, deep deposits, and we're getting ready to change the lives of people that are not even represented in this room. How impactful. So I want to commend each and every one of you for taking the initiative to come out and to get the greatest commodity and the most valuable asset to life, which is knowledge and education, backed with some encouragement. So if you wouldn't mind, just put your hands together and celebrate your participation this morning. I'm not going to be before you long, but I want to introduce to you a phenomenal person. Her name is Dr. Yolanda Martinez. She is the newly appointed Orange County Health Services Director, and she will say a few words on behalf of Mayor Jerry Demings, and if she will, you can come up and take your seat, the stand now. Not the seat, but the stand.
Well, good morning. What an honor to be here and to see so many people, as Mayor Dyer said, that are committed and vested in this effort. I want to say a few words on behalf of Mayor Demings, and forgive me, I need to put my glasses on because age is having its effect. So it is an honor for me to be here today, definitely. And I bring you greetings and a warm welcome on behalf of our Orange County Mayor, the Honorable Jerry Demings. Although Mayor Demings was not able to be here today, he understands the importance of the adverse childhood experiences and the long-lasting effects of trauma. He also understands the importance of the work of community members like all of you here today in strengthening the lives of our children. The success of our efforts rests on finding ways to replace the sources of trauma with positive and caring experiences, and that is what all of you are all about every day. Mayor Demings sends his wishes for a very successful meeting and future efforts as we seek to become a trauma-informed community. I also have the distinct honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Vincent Felitti. So I'll say a few words. A renowned physician and researcher, Dr. Felitti is one of the world's foremost experts on childhood trauma. Leading the charge in research into how adverse childhood experiences affect adults, he is co-principal investigator of the internationally recognized Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, ACE, a long-term in-depth analysis of over 17,000 adults. This study revealed a powerful relationship between our emotional experiences as children and our physical and mental health as adults. In fact, the study shows that humans convert childhood traumatic experiences into organic diseases later in life. Founder of the Department of Preventive Medicine for Kaiser Permanente, Dr. Felitti served as the Chief of Preventive Medicine for over 25 years. Under his leadership, the department provided comprehensive medical evaluations to 1.1 million individuals, becoming the largest single-site medical evaluation facility in the Western world. That's amazing. During this time, Dr. Felitti's revolutionary health risk abatement programs incorporated weight loss, smoking cessation, stress management, and a wide range of cutting-edge efforts to reduce patient risk factors. Dr. Felitti is clinical professor of medicine at the University of California and a fellow of the American College of Physicians. He is currently senior editor of the Permanente Journal and on the international editorial board of the Swiss medical journal Trauma und Gewalt. Dr. Felitti has served on advisory committees of the Institute of Medicine, the American Psychiatric Association, the Committee of the Secretary of Health and Human Services for Healthy People 2020, and the Advisory Committee on Women's Services for SAMHSA. A noted expert on the genetic diseases hemochromatosis, as well as obesity, he educates audiences around the country on these two very common deadly maladies. An engaging speaker, Dr. Felitti has traveled the world speaking with audiences and various policy leaders about his research. A well-versed medical expert, he also uses his knowledge to speak out against domestic violence and other forms of childhood trauma. Drawing on his years of experience, he has become an important voice advocating for the well-being of children everywhere. While time may not heal all wounds, Dr. Felitti helps show audiences how we can understand physical and mental traumas and ultimately prevent them, and that's what we're all about. So please help me welcome Dr. Vincent Felitti.
Well, thank you. It's an interesting surprise to see so many people here and with such a diversity of occupations. So the resistance is weakening. There's a question that's implicit in these two photographs, and that is, if someone gave you this newborn infant with its extraordinary potential and said you had 18 years to develop it into the person lying unconscious on a San Diego sidewalk, overlooked by a world that really is not interested in understanding those things, what would you have to do to attain that end? That's really what this is about. I'll give you a brief summary of what we learned to give you some skeletal structure to hang the supporting data on. That what we're terming adverse childhood experiences, soon to be described, are very common and strongly unrecognized, They are powerful predictors of adult social malfunction, emotional distress, health risks, disease, and premature death. How does that work? And that combination of high prevalence and great destructiveness makes adverse childhood experiences the leading determinant of the health and psychosocial well-being and economy of the nation. The study really began with this patient, my teacher, as it turns out, who showed up in 1985 in a major obesity program that we were running, using a new technology of supplemented absolute fasting. In other words, zero food. But a special supplement is needed to keep from dying with that. And asked if we could help with her problem. Our first mistake was accepting her diagnosis of what the problem was. So we said yes, took her into the program, and in 51 weeks took her from 408 to 132 pounds. And understandably assumed, oh my God, we must really know what we're doing. And she taught us we had no idea what we were doing, but merely were in possession of a powerful technology. Here, by the way, is a picture of her when she was age 8. Which forces a difficult question upon us. My God, what happened? Obviously, we're not going to be able to escape by saying, well, she must have been born fat, etc. Here is her weight curve. Looks like an Olympic ski jump. 408 to 132, she stays there a couple of weeks, and then in one 3-week period, does something I had not conceived as physiologically possible. She regains 37 pounds in 3 weeks. And I remember, what's going on? I think I'm sleep eating, she said. What do you mean? Well, when I was a kid, I used to be a sleepwalker. I haven't done that for years, but I live alone. And when I go to bed at night, everything is clean and put away in the kitchen. I wake up in the morning, boxes and cans are open, pots and dishes are dirty, somebody's obviously been cooking and eating there, I'm the only person there. I have no recollection of any of this, but I guess that's what must be happening. Okay, I never heard of it before, but it's got a certain force of logic to it, but why now? I don't know, but what do you think? I don't know. We went through that a few cycles, and then she said, well, actually, there was this man at work. He was a much older man. He was married. And he said to me, hey, Patty, you look pretty good. You lost all that weight. How about you and me making it every week? And that was the day the sleep eating began. And I remember thinking, well, it's a pretty crummy proposition, but I mean, this is 1986. It is Southern California. It's kind of an extreme response. Why the extreme response? And pursuing that, in a few minutes, she was telling me about her grandfather beginning to have vaginal intercourse with her when she was 10 and continuing for the next 10 years. And that was when the weight gain began. Oh, wow. And then in short order, she had regained back to over 400 again and disappeared for 12 years. So this was really an extraordinary story. And here's what she accomplished within 1 year, and then disappeared. 12 years later, she came back and had bariatric surgery. And at a point where she had lost only 94 pounds, which was not yet clearly visible, I mean, the volumetric reduction was not obvious, she became intractably suicidal. 5 psychiatric hospitalizations in 1 year, 3 courses of electroshock to gain control of the situation. And here she is about a year after all of that, explaining why that happened.
I wasn't really handling the weight loss too well. I mean, it came up too quick, and I just felt like I was losing my protective wall. It was like, you were right, there was no going back. I wasn't able to use food as my way to have my solution back. It was like I lost my solution, and I was having a hard time trying to find other solutions to deal with underlying issues of obesity versus just using the obesity as my law.
So what she is saying is that one of the major public health problems that we have is for her not a problem, it's a solution to problems that we know nothing about. Because we have all been very effectively taught as children that nice people don't talk about certain things, and my God, surely don't ask questions about them. And hence we know nothing about all of this. Keep the idea in mind, this public health paradox, that what we perceive as the problem may actually be someone's solution. It's a very important and commonly relevant idea. Here's her sister. Her sister is also over 400 pounds. It would be a very easy mistake to say, oh my God, runs in the family, it must be genetic. But interestingly, speaking English ran in that family, and we don't stupidly jump to the conclusion that therefore speaking English must be genetic. Let's listen to what her sister has to say.
What's the heaviest you've ever been in your life?
In excess of 400.
So the same as your sister Patty?
Yes.
And how and why did you get so fat?
I was abused sexually by my uncle, and once again I used food as a comfort. I didn't have much of a childhood because I started working when I was 13. Then I got married at 17 to get away.
How old were you when your parents got divorced?
I thought I was 9.
Did you ever see your father again?
No.
How do you think being abandoned by him affected you in the rest of your life?
It affected me a lot, especially with the growing up years, because like there was father-daughter dances and dinners, and I'd have to take an uncle, and things like this. Everybody else would talk about their fathers, and mine wasn't around, and it was devastating when my mom and dad broke up. I remember very distinctly.
The association of childhood onset obesity with parental divorce is major and overwhelmingly unrecognized.
What's the heaviest?
Here's a man's view of things. He became obese as a child after his parents divorced, and he had to go live with his violent alcoholic grandfather so his mother could work. And he recalls eating for solace, as in our phrase, comfort food. And as he grew obese, he discovered that obesity offered advantages. Think of our expression, throwing your weight around. But it's easier to blame McDonald's for why kids get fat. So let's listen to what he has to say.
It wasn't that I ate because I was hungry, and I was, when I look at it, it was just a place for me to feel safe. As a child, I remember there was a point, I would probably say, all the way from kindergarten to, God, I don't know what grade, but waited on didn't happen.
We had 2 men in the program around that time who worked as guards at the state penitentiary downtown. One lost 100, the other lost 150 pounds. They were very clear that they were no longer comfortable going into the cell block at regular size. They felt a lot better going in looking big as a refrigerator. Here's another person who helped us discover general principles. She was molested by multiple people as a little girl, totally unrecognized by her parents. She ate to feel better and then discovered that obesity reduces sexual attention. And again, we're facing that public health paradox that what we view commonly as a public health problem is for the individual involved often a solution to problems we know nothing about.
Ella H. started the interview by spontaneously commenting on the threat she felt when her psychiatrist recommended bariatric surgery to treat her obesity and offered to sign the necessary paperwork to have Kaiser Health Fund pay for the procedure.
Can I get comfortable first? And then he says, no. He says, when drug addicts come, we take them off the drugs first. And he would take me off of my drug. Food was my comfort food. I coped with life with food. And it's really strange tonight. I guess the Prozac's helping because when I'm taking Prozac, I will lose a little bit of weight. And I just feel that he was taking away my safety. And so I decided not to even bring the paper to the doctor and have it done because I'm not ready, I don't think, to get the weight off and know that I can't gain it back and can't be safe again.
There's an analogy here to smoke and house fires. When a house is burning down, the manifest symptom is the smoke billowing out. We can only thank God that fire departments understand that one does not get seduced into treating the manifest symptom, otherwise they'd be treating house fires by bringing big fans to blow the smoke away. It's a good metaphor to keep in mind because it comes into play commonly. So, what we found now was that in spite of our great success, we had a very unusual problem. Our successful patients were dropping out of the program. And slowly we discovered that what we thought we were treating was actually their protection, and they were fleeing the loss of their protection. Some understood that consciously, some did not. So the whole program changed now from teaching people to, quote, eat right, which is what you do when you don't know what to do. The program reoriented towards small group sessions to help people explore why they became obese. Not how is obvious, why, and what the benefits were that would be lost with major weight loss. Here's an interesting woman, again, heavily molested as a child. She successfully treated that with 3-pack-a-day smoking. Nicotine has major psychoactive benefits, been understood at least for a century. Within 15 or 20 seconds of inhalation, it has anti-anxiety activity, appetite suppressant activity. American Indians discovered centuries ago anger suppressant activity. They were burning tobacco in their ceremonial peace pipes, not moss or oak leaves. But aren't there risks? Yeah, of course there are risks. They're major. They're 15 or 20 years away. And I think when the screws are on tight enough, we can easily understand, give me that pack of smokes now. I'll worry about 20 years from now next week when things calm down. So listen to what she has to say. She maintained her slender size by 3-pack-a-day smoking, got married. At age 35, when she weighed 130 pounds, her husband convinced her to stop smoking for her health. She did. And she suddenly was flooded with male sexual attention that she never had to deal with before, explaining to me that when you smoke 3 packs a day, there's a cloud around you that keeps people at a certain distance. She became very anxious, started eating, and ate her way back to 300 pounds. Now, she went into acute and chronic respiratory failure because the lung damage that she had been able to tolerate at a lower weight, she could not handle, and she's on 24-hour-a-day oxygen. Listen to what she has to say.
You supplied me recently a lengthy autobiography, a number of dozens of pages altogether. And on the very next to the last line, you said something that I thought was extraordinary. Let me read it to you because I think it's remarkable. I believe smoking 3 packs a day and weighing 300 pounds are not the problem. They're the symptom. It took us a long time to figure that out here. You just So you are a respiratory failure on 24-hour-a-day oxygen.
Yes.
Major amounts of weight, overweight.
Yes.
And you demonstrated, or we demonstrated together, a couple of years ago that when you had a major weight loss in the Optifast program here, that your need for oxygen disappeared.
That's correct.
So that if you lost 150 pounds approximately, the need for oxygen would no longer be there. The weight came back. Most people have very little understanding of why people get that, or we are stuck with the simple belief, don't know it's bad for you, etc. And people tend to know even less about smoking.
Yes.
It's labeled as an addiction, and as though that somehow explains it all.
Right.
You know, etc. And you make this extraordinary statement about what we perceive as the problem really being the solution. Can you explain more about that?
In the weight program, we took her from 310 to 150 pounds. She no longer needed the oxygen. We, again, naively thought great success. Male sexual attention starts coming back, and she consciously makes the decision she will get back to over 300 pounds again and accept the fact that she will be on 24-hour-a-day oxygen for the rest of her life. Usually that's an unconscious decision. In her, it was a clear, conscious decision. So that brings us back to the public health paradox with these few examples, that many of our most common and intractable public health problems are also unconsciously attempted solutions to personal experiences typically occurring in childhood that are lost in time and then further concealed by shame and by secrecy and by social taboos against exploring certain topics. Keep this idea with you when you leave today. It has great relevance. So all of this was what led to the ACE study. If these things are so common in this population, do they exist in the general population? So I presented our obesity findings at a national obesity conference in Atlanta in 1990. Was attacked by the audience. There was a dinner for speaker afterwards. Someone from the CDC was seated next to me, and he said, look, if what you're saying is true, it's got enormous importance for the country as well as the practice of medicine, but nobody's going to believe your 286 cases, no matter how well you studied them. What we need is a large, epidemiologically sound study with thousands of people in it. Well, I remembered I was up to my knees in charts with 286 cases that we were studying. My God, how do you handle thousands? Well, fortunately, they were used to this. And so we spent the next 2 years thinking how we would do this, what we would do, etc. We decided to study 26,000 adults going through my department for comprehensive medical evaluation. This had nothing to do with obesity, general population, and asked them if they would help us learn how experiences in childhood might affect adult health. So we put that proposal together after 2 years of work, submitted it to the Institutional Review Board, turned down flat. Otherwise sensible people told us, you can't use that questionnaire. You're going to cause patients to decompensate, maybe become suicidal. You can't use that questionnaire. We spent 9 months battling before we got agreement. And when we put it into play, we asked 26,000 consecutive people coming through for comprehensive medical evaluation if they'd help us. And 17,500 agreed. And then, after very comprehensive medical evaluation and going back into early life experiences of childhood and so forth, we then followed them for the next 20 years. So that's the basis for the ACE study. So the blue box in the center here represents comprehensive medical evaluation. The population, 80% white, including Hispanic, 10% black, 10% Asian, 1% American Indian. Almost exactly half men, half women. Average age 57, range 24 to 94. 74% had been to college. This was clearly a solidly middle-class population, and what we found was extraordinary. And in the 20-year follow-up, we matched what had happened roughly a half century earlier against pharmacy costs, ER visits, doctor office visits, hospitalization and diagnoses, and so on, and mortality. Here are the 10 categories that we studied. They're hardly the only 10 in the world. They were simply the most common 10 in our obesity program. Major emotional abuse, basically recurrent humiliation and so forth, acknowledged by 11% of people. Major physical abuse, not spanking, I'm talking serious beating with fists, sticks, and other objects, 28%. Contact sexual abuse, not somebody flashing a kid. Contact sexual abuse, 28% for women, 16% for men. Basically, this was a group like you and me. Believe me, it took months to accept the validity of all of this and a great deal of checking to document it. Major emotional neglect, 15%. Major physical neglect, 10%. growing up in a household where one of the members of your household was an alcoholic or a drug user, 27%, losing a biological parent for any reason, suicide, abandonment, divorce, before the age of 18, 23%, growing up in a home where one of the members of your household was chronically depressed or mentally ill or in the state hospital, 17%, growing up in a home where mother was treated violently, 13%, growing up in a home where one of your household members was imprisoned during your childhood or adolescence, 5%. So those were the 10 categories that we studied in this population like you and me. And what we learned was extraordinary. We created an ACE score, which was the sum of the number of categories, not events or incidents, but number of categories of events that was acknowledged. And what you see is that 33% acknowledged none of those 10. 1 in 9 people, 11%, acknowledged 5 or more of those categories. We found that if any category was present, there was an 87% chance that at least one other category would be present, and a 50% chance of 3 or more categories. And that women were 50% more likely than men to have an ACE score of 5 or higher. So what does this look like in the office? Well, here's a patient who is an alcoholic, a 3-pack-a-day smoker, heavy user of crystal meth. We would dismiss this ordinarily as seriously dysfunctional behavior. Listen to what he has to say. Well, looks like something happened to the file. Well, I will tell you what he says. He speaks of the beneficial aspects of those things in terms of their keeping the door to the past closed. Isn't that interesting? Sit down, have a drink, relax. Well, some people need a great deal of relaxing. Sit down, have something to eat, you'll feel better. Some people need to feel better a lot. Street drugs? Absolutely. Don't you know they're bad for you? Yeah, I've heard that, but I use them because they help. Here's an interesting insight. Everyone knows crystal meth, bad stuff, people die from it, etc. Pretty much no one knows that the first successful prescription antidepressant introduced for sale in the United States in 1940 by Burroughs Wellcome and Company was methamphetamine. The very pharmaceutical that, when it's sold on the street in unknown dose in impure form, is called crystal meth. Does that mean anything? That our most commonly sold street drug is an effective antidepressant? But isn't it dangerous? Well, if you don't understand dosage, pretty much any drug is dangerous. You know, you take 30 aspirin instead of 2, you've taken a suicidal dose. Double your digitalis, you'd be dead in 2 weeks. That's no surprise. The point is the functionality, short term, they help now when I need help. Give me that pack of smokes now, I'll worry about 20 years from now, next week, when things calm down. So he's talking about our 3 most common addictions, addiction being the unconscious compulsive use of psychoactive materials or agents, or as we have painted on the wall in our obesity program, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. Well, maybe the next mouthful will do it, or the next cigarette, or the next drink, or the next woman, or the next man. And if not, well, surely the one after that. Our conventional belief is that addiction is the result of characteristics that are intrinsic in the molecular structure of certain materials. You know, when I was a kid, we repeatedly heard, oh, you take heroin enough times, you're not going to be able to stop. Really. Well, there was a very interesting study carried out in the closing years of the Vietnam War by a woman named Lee Robbins, who went to Vietnam and interviewed almost 900 American soldiers who acknowledged to her, but not to the Army, that they had used heroin daily in Vietnam for at least the antecedent 30 days. When they were discharged, she met with them again 8 months after discharge when they were back in America. Went all over the country, and this is a big task to interview each of them all over the place. And incredibly, after 8 months back home, 94% were no longer using heroin. Isn't that an interesting insight? And this was with no treatment, because nothing was officially known to the Army. A useful thing to keep in mind. What we found was that addiction highly correlates with characteristics intrinsic to that individual's childhood experiences. For a moment, let's go back to crystal meth. This is a full-page advertisement from the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1943 for methamphetamine, the highly successful and beneficial new prescription antidepressant. Many people, most people, speak of depression as a disease. Some say it's genetic, some say it's due to a chemical imbalance in the brain, and there's something to be said for each of those. But what if depression were not a disease, but a normal response to abnormal life experiences? Here's the evidence for that. When we looked at self-acknowledged chronic depression in our ACE study patients, 17,500 people, matching them to adverse childhood experiences on average a half century earlier, we plotted out the ACE score, women in red, men in yellow. You see a very clear so-called dose-response curve that as the ACE score goes up, the likelihood of this particular outcome goes up proportionately a half a century later. When we looked at suicide attempts, really strong, ACE score 6 is so huge that it doesn't fit onto the chart without compressing the rest of it into illegibility. At ACE score 6 or higher, the likelihood of attempting suicide is between 3,100 and 5,000% higher than at ACE score 0. And when we look at people taking antidepressant medications roughly a half century later, we see again the dose-response curve. As the ACE score goes up, the likelihood of being on antidepressants a half century later goes up in a stepwise fashion. We looked at amnesia. You know, it's funny, Doc, I just don't remember anything from around when I was 11 to when I was 13. There's just nothing there somehow. We match that against ACE score. See the same dose response. Hallucinations, the making of madness. Of course, you'd have to ask everybody if they have ever hallucinated, seen things or heard things that really weren't there. And what you see is a very clear relationship of ACE score to hallucinatory activity, so that at ACE score 7 or higher, 10% of people have symptoms of hallucinatory activity. Being on antipsychotic medications a half century later, related to ACE score. High-level promiscuity, which we arbitrarily defined as 50 or more lifetime sexual partners, clearly related to underlying ACE score. Likelihood of later being raped. Wow. I once naively thought that rape was fairly uncommon. Of course, to find out, you'd have to ask everybody, which we did, which typically, of course, one would not do. Clear relationship. Think about that for a minute. How does what happens to a little girl increase the likelihood of being raped later in life? It's a useful thing to think about. Unintended pregnancy or elective abortion. Unintended pregnancy in red, elective abortion in yellow, relationship to underlying ACE score. Relationship to smoking or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema. Clear relationship. Relationship to heart disease. Isn't that interesting? We all know that the Framingham study discovered 13, turns out, factors relating to heart disease, cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, etc. What we found was that the individual ACE factors had a distinct relationship to increased likelihood of heart disease. Here's a patient who's illustrative of that. We'll look at cancer in this instance. And this is somebody who's articulate, well-dressed. She runs a responsible department in a large university. She's obviously doing well and just the kind of person from whom we'd not seek an abusive childhood history. Of course, we'd skip such a history for our own comfort, but we'd be smart enough to say that we see no need to risk upsetting a patient who's doing so well. So listen to what she has to say about this.
Can you tell just by looking at me that I was an abused child? Can you tell that I was sexually abused routinely, that I was neglected, starved, eaten? Probably not. You would have to ask in order to find out, and that's not the sort of thing that people typically ask about. The downside of having this kind of childhood is that it translates into health problems in adulthood, at least in my situation it seems to have done. I'm now recovering from my third battle with cancer. Not the same cancer, 3 different kinds of cancer. I've had chronic pelvic pain, migraines, the whole laundry list of medical complaints, all of those sorts of things that are very difficult for physicians to figure out. Growing up that way instills a constant fear, a constant state of turmoil that's just under the surface of a veneer that's fairly thin. Little things become scary in an atmosphere like that, and once you've internalized all of that, it's very difficult to let go of it.
How does what happens to a little girl affect the likelihood of having 3 different kinds of cancer decades later? That's the question. How does that work? Initially, when we stumbled into the increased prevalence of, you smoke 3 packs a day, of course. That's true, but that's just a little piece of the answer. Here's an extreme example. This is an autobiography. It is the most extraordinarily frank autobiography that I can conceive of, written by a woman who's a United States federal judge. Gotten to meet her a number of times in San Diego. Father had vaginal intercourse with her for about a decade as a little girl. Worse yet, he used to bring her into saloons at night, sell her to strangers for sex. Somehow she does not commit suicide. She does not become a mass murderer. She graduates from high school, gets a scholarship to college, graduates, gets a scholarship to law school, graduates, ultimately becomes a United States federal judge. It would be very easy to say, isn't it wonderful, the way that little girl with that hideous history has been so resilient and so successful. Resilience is a very popular subject. It's a way of avoiding things. Well, kids are resilient. I mean, a kid's only 2, he's not going to remember that. We base resilience on economic success, on social success, occupational success. We never look at biomedical outcomes. Judge Bullock has had 5 different kinds of cancer. In 50 years, I have never seen a patient with 5 different kinds of cancer. In addition, she has 2 autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis and lupus. We studied 21 different autoimmune diseases in our 20-year follow-up to see if there was conceivably any relationship to ACE-score. And indeed there was. 16 of the 21 had a very clear dose-response relationship. Well, how does that work? Well, we're all forming, talk now about cancer, we're all forming cancer cells every day in small numbers and from a huge variety of organs, many of which most people have never heard of. And our immune system recognizes them and destroys them, and we never know the difference. One of the things that has been discovered about so-called traumatic stress, stress that is ongoing in terms of mental thoughts recurring, is chronic hyperstimulation of certain areas of the brain. One of the areas causes immune system suppression. In other words, our immune system is no longer able to deal with the low-level production of abnormal cancer cells every day, and they start growing and multiplying. We know a little bit about this indirectly because you all know if somebody gets an organ transplant, they have to be on immune suppression the rest of their life so they don't reject the organ. Some people will correctly have heard that one of the effects of lifetime immunosuppression is an increased risk of cancer. But, if I'm going to die without this kidney next week, I'll take the risk of cancer 20 years from now, no question. So we've known it, but we've never really put the pieces together until fairly recently. So this is Judge Bullock's story. The woman I showed you a minute before her died at age 42, not of the 3 cancers, but died of a heart attack. She had none of the conventional risk factors. One of the other effects of chronic hyperstimulation of certain areas of the brain in traumatic stress is the ongoing release of pro-inflammatory chemicals causing inflammatory changes in the lining of blood vessels, giving them a magnetic effect and ability, like a magnet, to pull cholesterol out of blood as it passes by, regardless of the level of cholesterol, ultimately causing obstruction in that vessel. So we looked also at how this affects people at work. ACE-score and ongoing absenteeism a half-century later. ACE-score and self-acknowledged serious financial problems. We're used to thinking of poverty as a cause of other things. Here we're talking about poverty being the result of adverse childhood experiences being an outcome rather than a primary cause. And last, serious problems performing my job properly. We found that at a score 4 or more, the majority of adults have multiple risk factors for these diseases, or the diseases themselves, or have died early. We found, for instance, that many chronic diseases are determined decades earlier in childhood, not by childhood diseases, as would have been the case 50 or 100 years ago, but by life experiences. You think for a minute, polio, smallpox, diphtheria, tetanus, those are gone in this country. People are dying of different things that have different sources. And the ways of getting to these diseases are threefold. One is through the damaging side effects of various coping mechanisms. Smoking, because nicotine, as I mentioned before, has major psychoactive benefits, major health problems too, but they are decades away. Alcoholism, illicit drug use, in other words, buying antidepressants on the street, but not having any idea of what the dose is, etc. Promiscuity, so on. So that's one way of getting from life experience to disease decades later. Second category is by a far more complex mechanism, namely the effects of major unrelieved stress on key brain functions that affect essential body processes like inflammation and like immune responses. And there's a third category called epigenetics. Epigenetics refers to the ability of social and environmental change to put a tag on certain genes that essentially is like an on-off light switch. It doesn't alter the structure of the gene. That would be a mutation. This is like putting an on-off light switch. This was a brand new field when we were planning the ACE study. The word barely existed. The field has grown explosively, and I have no doubt that you'll be hearing a lot about epigenetic changes in upcoming years. So we saw that adverse childhood experiences are the main cause of health risk behaviors, social malfunction, disease, disability, premature death, and healthcare costs. In terms of premature death, a person with an ACE score of 6 or higher has on average a shortening of life expectancy of 19.7 years, basically 20-year shortening. So the effects of these are major. Ultimately, one ends up wondering, why are these things so difficult to deal with? And here's an insight into that. These are PET scans. PET scans are a very sophisticated kind of X-ray that depicts in color biochemical activity. PET scans of the brains of 2 3-year-old little boys. The one on the left is a normal kid. The one on the right is a kid that was taken from a Romanian orphanage about 20 years ago. Some of you will remember that under the government routine at that time, in orphanages, children were fed, but that was essentially all. They were more or less on isolation the rest of their lives. And what you see there is large areas of the brain that have no color in it compared to the one on the left. And at age 3, when brain is being formed, it's not going to tax anyone's imagination too much to think that that's going to affect the kind of brain that's being formed. In other words, we're changing life experience, we're translating life experience into neuroanatomy, and maybe that has something to do with why these things are so difficult to deal with decades later. You could summarize this in this sort of way. There's a very large base of people with adverse childhood experience, overwhelmingly unrecognized, producing, we realize now, disruptions in brain development early in life, producing various kinds of impairment. Maybe this is the socially isolated kid, the kid who has trouble learning in school, the kid who's the weepy kid. By the time they become teenagers, they have enough freedom to try to find something that helps. Eating, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, sex, and those things that help in the short term, given time, have major problems that they produce: disease, disability, social problems, imprisonment, etc., poverty, homelessness, leading to early death. And the whole sequence is generally unrecognized. So if we're going to improve things at all, it would be first understanding that these problems are common, not in those people across town, but in us, and recognizing them in clinical practice. How do we deal with this on a population basis? Dealing with it on an individual basis is complex, kind, helpful, etc., but very consuming and hence far too costly for most people effort to get near. How do we improve this on a population basis? I believe that the answer to that would be to figure out how to improve parenting skills across the nation. How could we help 30 or 40 million young adults become more effective parents, to learn what supportive parenting looks like and how it plays out decades later, to learn what destructive parenting looks like and plays out decades later? To me, it's clear that this would not be by, conventional didactic teaching, but rather by depiction and illustration, storytelling, if you will. What if someone were to develop a serial soap opera for TV that had woven into the storyline illustrations of what supportive parenting looks like and plays out decades later, contrasting that with illustrations of destructive parenting, what it looks like and how it plays out? I believe that would be a very viable approach, and maybe some of you are in a position to begin working on that. But how do we use this? Here's where we carried the work out on the top floor of this building. It was an unusual setting. And we decided to integrate into the general medical history questionnaire, a 10-page questionnaire that was filled out at home as step one of the 2-visit process of comprehensive medical evaluation. People got this lengthy paper-based questionnaire, filled it out. When they brought it in, it was fed into a digital scanner. It would give us a nice laser printout of all of the yes answers. And we integrated that. My colleagues assured me I was crazy. You can't ask patients questions like that. My God, they'll be furious, and no one will tell you the truth anyway. Well, ultimately, we did this with 440,000 patients over a multi-year period, 0 patient complaints. Lots of colleague complaints. What the hell am I supposed to do with this information? Etc. If I wanted to be a damn shrink, I'd have been a shrink. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist or something safe. So what we found was that the old way that we worked, a purely biomedical process, led to an 11% reduction in doctor office visits in the year subsequent. And, we were very pleased with that. thinking, well, this is because of more accurate diagnosis, more skillful entry of people into complex medical care system, etc. And I think those things are true. When we added the ACE questions and became a biopsychosocial approach, as it were, a mathematician at the University of California who had a startup data mining company that now is on the New York Stock Exchange came by, and he offered at no charge to do a 135,000 patient study, 2.5 years throughput for the department, to see if adding these ACE questions made any difference. Incredibly, he found that it triggered a 35% reduction in doctor office visits in the next year compared to their prior year, and an 11% reduction in emergency room visits. That has multi-billion-dollar implications. There are now 21 state legislatures, most recently California, that have passed legislation designed to support the routine collection of ACE histories in medical settings, because they appreciate what the implications of that are for state Medicaid budget. If you could knock 35% off a state Medicaid budget, that's kind of a mind-boggling idea. So here's an extract from an actual case. This would be the nice laser printout that we got. Patient, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, often feels hopeless and down in the dumps, difficulty sticking up for herself, serious problems with her family, her job, her finances, has used street drugs in the past, would like to be tested for AIDS, physically abused as a child, verbally abused, sexually molested, etc. Well, what am I going to do with this information? Well, what we did was remarkably easy. In the exam room, we would say to a patient, I see on the questionnaire that. Can you tell me how that has affected you later in your life? And we listened. Period. We did one other thing, but it took us a while to figure that out. We implicitly accepted that person. We enabled somebody to tell us the worst secret of their life, typically for the first time, to tell that to a person who was important to them, and enabled them to come out of that realizing a minute or two later that, I still seem to be accepted, they want to see me again, etc. And we believe that is what triggered the 35% reduction in doctor office visits. Because if you ask the question, well, why do patients come see doctors? The easy answer is because they're sick. Well, sometimes that's true. A more perceptive answer was from a Hungarian physician psychoanalyst named Michael Balint, an extraordinary man, who made the observation patients see doctors because of anxiety about being sick. Doctors see patients because of disease, and therein lies the problem between the two. As in, oh doctor, I'm so afraid I must have a brain tumor. I've had these terrible headaches for 20 years now. No, if you had a brain tumor, you'd have died 19 years ago. Is there anything else bothering you? Seems to ring a bell. So the practice implications of this are to routinely incorporate ACE questions into comprehensive medical evaluation of all adults. And we found on a huge scale that this was affordable, acceptable, and powerfully beneficial, also strongly resisted. and that it is demonstrably realistic to move from our current symptom-reactive mode of practice and start dealing with underlying causes and improve care while markedly reducing its cost. And that a trauma-oriented, comprehensive medical history, collected initially by an inert mechanism, not face-to-face, too easy to screw up face-to-face, and it would take basically an hour to get all of this information and hence be exceedingly costly and so on. That sort of comprehensive history collected by an inert mechanism, probably best in a digital format, but our experience has been with paper so far, has major benefits and is proposed as the routine entry mechanism into all ongoing care, be it medical, psychological, or institutional, as in prisons. So here's what we have been talking about. Namely, adverse childhood experiences are common but overwhelmingly unrecognized. Their link to major problems later in life is strong, makes sense, and logical. I mean, even the patients can explain it, as you saw in the video clips, which I highly recommend. If you start heavily using this, there will be people that you will meet who are very good at speaking about these things when given the chance. Consider making a video clip for teaching purposes. My experience has been the patients were highly likely to be agreeable to it. You know, I would tell them, look, you know stuff doctors need to know. Would you be willing to talk with me on video? It's not going to be on NBC News tonight, but I will want to use little pieces of it in lectures and so on. I have never been turned down that I can recall. They are the nation's most basic public health problem. That it's comfortable to mistake intermediary mechanism for, well, the reason a kid's fat is because that damn McDonald's opened. Or, oh, the reason you're depressed is because you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. Indeed, you do have a chemical imbalance in your brain, but that's an intermediary mechanism, not a basic cause. That what presents as the problem may be somebody's attempted solution, and treating their solution may be threatening and cause people to flee treatment, as is common in drug addiction programs, as we found was common in the early days of our obesity program. And that primary prevention, keeping these from happening in the first place, is presently the only realistic population approach. And that change has been resisted by us in spite of enormous benefits. If you'd like further information, I would suggest that you simply type in the words "a study" on the internet and on YouTube, and you will find an extraordinary flood of information. I mean, a study will bring at least 20 pages on the computer of various citations dealing with specific aspects. And if you have specific questions that you want to learn more about, like, well, what's the relationship of a study to, of ACEs, of adverse childhood experiences, to diabetes? Type in "a study -diabetes," and you'll get 2 or 3 pages of citations. It's quite extraordinary. So keep in mind that idea, typing those words in on the internet and seeing what's there. We have time for questions. Where would you like to go with this?
I think one of the most amazing things is you're getting past that resistance. Culture is biological, our resistance is biological, so kudos to you. You've broken through whatever that barrier is. You provide the list of 10 ACE items, but what you're really telling us is it's physiological, it's a real thing, and causes real damage. that means it is really detectable by other means other than just those 10 questions. So we're now at the point where we have technologies, everything from tone analysis, you mentioned storytelling, being able to track stories as with children. We provided 10 minutes a week in every class throughout the K-12 period to be able to use artificial intelligence and others. You mentioned biomedical ways as well. In other words, we're at the point now we can walk through, just like with the metal detector, we can detect these changes because they are real and physiological in children right as they occur and perhaps intervene before the damage becomes permanent. So we are ready for that. You brought us to the point where we're ready to have that technology produced. We're there today. So thank you very much. You know, what do you think about the possibility of having that? I think we're there. This is fading in and out there.
Well, as you test out various ideas, do think about using some tracking mechanism to determine what measurable effect what you've done has. We measured simple things like doctor office visits, patient satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole range of things that could be followed depending on where you do. I mean, if you're working in a prison, does that affect the rate of reinternment in the prison, et cetera? Does it affect the rate of employment after release from prison?
Hello, I'm not sure if this question is appropriate, but for those of us who are working in education or perhaps in a public agency, what are some even small steps we can do to help our students or help our clients progress that is obviously affordable and it's something that we can learn individually because doesn't even have the financial or manpower to perform those studies?
So you can find on the internet the one-page version of the A-study questionnaire that we developed specifically for people to experiment with. Use that, have 50 or 100 people fill it out anonymously. Pool the data, bring them together in an auditorium, put the slide up of their pooled anonymous data. What do you think this means? Freed of individual attachment to that, people are able to speak freely. And these lead to remarkable commentaries. I did this at the medical school in Iceland a couple of years ago. I asked the dean to have the students fill out the ACE questionnaire anonymously about 2 months before I got there. I used that slide as part of my presentation, unspecified as to where it was from. What do you all think this means? It's very, very active discussion. I only wish I had had the foresight to have someone photograph their faces and kind of told them that it was they had been discussing. You know, like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one in the school or the only one in the country, etc. So that's a very useful device that works well to get people to speak openly about these issues that ordinarily are unspoken.
Doctor, question for you from the standpoint of our community paramedicine, standing back. Our paramedics are in the home doing chronic care management, and they don't have a great deal of time in their assessment to determine what the problems are. But we're including evidence-based questions related to food insecurity and a lot of other areas. What are the quick 1 or 2 questions that lead us into exploring the possibility that there's some piece involvement in this case?
I don't know, but you're obviously in a good position to find out. It's a simple enough experiment to do it different ways and see what works best. I simply would say that because of the closed nature of some of these questions, that clearly it is best to get the information by an inert mechanism rather than face-to-face. Face-to-face, you run into, well, first, the time problem. It's like, well, this doctor's too young to, this was too old to understand. I'd rather talk to a lady doctor about this. I'd rather talk to somebody who's Polish or Cambodian like me that would understand me, etc. too many things can screw that up, and quickly you decide, well, hell, this is just an embarrassment for me. Of course, I'd never say that. You can't humiliate your patients by asking these questions. So using an inert mechanism clearly is the best way to do it. Probably on the internet, but here's another approach. If you could get a local newspaper or a student newspaper to publish the questionnaire asking the readership to respond anonymously, publish the pooled data a couple of days later, the interest level in a population galvanizes. My God, did you see what's in the paper today? You won't believe it. You better get a copy and look. And the newspaper publishers were very happy because their advertising rates are based on readership. So it works out well in all counts.
Thank you. I think what we've done is develop a paper piece, and on our first visit, we won't bring it up, but we'll leave that behind, and that gives us a chance on future visits to think about what we learned. Thank you.
Doctor, is there any plan to create a facilitator or someone qualified to travel to schools or places like this that has the ability to successfully translate what you're saying? So it's really not as simple as it sounds when you're trying to convince people of something that they're not used to hearing.
I don't have a useful answer to that, but you should be aware of a blog that has been created by a newspaper woman named Jane Stevens. It's called acesconnection.com. Comes out daily, gives you access to people literally around the world who are interested in the ACE study, and posing that kind of question is likely to get you at least a handful of answers and suggestions from people working that way every day. So acesconnection.com is something to become familiar with.
Hello, hi. Hello. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm in the back corner. Thank you so much for this. I work with a community organization, and we work mostly in low-income communities and communities of color around social justice issues and civic engagement. And so this is really helpful because we really, our leaders that we're building with really have a lot of trauma. And so we are always trying to figure out how do we support them. And also our organization, a lot of focus on trauma. So this has been really helpful. So I want to thank you for this. One question I have is that when we were sharing some ideas around solutions, it really seemed to me that there's a structural racism piece to this, as well as sort of class and gender, which is the story you elevate or women, right? And so I just wonder, as we think about solutions to this, how do we think about institutionalized oppression as we figure out the solution to how to address? There's certain demographics of folks who face certain levels of trauma, right? And not to say that's the only frame, but there's systems in place around race, around gender, around class, that also structure life experiences. So just if you had any thoughts about how kind of you use that frame to think about solutions or some maybe examples.
I apologize. I had difficulty understanding enough of what you were saying that I can't respond to the question.
So my question was, is that louder? Sorry, okay, I'm talking. So really my question is around how do you think about institutionalized oppression, particularly as it relates to class, race, and gender, and thinking about solutions to how to address this. Particularly, I feel like a lot of your examples certainly highlighted women, for example. And so just wondering if there's any examples or models you have seen that particularly acknowledge how social conditions structured by institutionalized oppression impact this.
You're inquiring about institutional depression?
Oppression.
Oppression. Oh. I don't really have a reliable, I can give you personal opinion, but I wouldn't consider that worth much without having large-scale experience with that. So I'm not able to give you an answer that I would find satisfactory.
Dr. Clay, in the back here. Is there any current research in ACE's connection to criminality, incarceration at this point?
Quite limited. I had someone a few months ago send me the results of an ACE questionnaire on 200 individuals in a Norwegian prison. So it's beginning to pick up. I think it's a terrific place, to look, to begin that, because my limited experience with prisons has been that they're really, far short of what we would anticipate they might be accomplishing. So I think that would be very useful, and I suspect strongly that you have a very interested audience in there. Again, getting 100 people in an auditorium to fill out the questionnaire anonymously, put it up on the screen, what do you guys think this means? I think that would be a very good way of beginning, to be able to speak, to enable people to speak openly about this body.
Good morning. First, I would like to reiterate just the gratitude that I think all of us would like to express to you for not just today, but for all the work that you've done. It's obvious that, you've And I had two questions, but interestingly enough, your advice to just Google, what the question is, it worked, and I found a journal, so I look forward to reading about self-harm behavior as it relates to the ACEs study. That's something that I'm seeing across the board, having the pleasure to serve for over 10 years, adolescents, so I look forward to that information. The question that I had is serving adolescents, those under 18. It's my understanding from the work that you shared with us today and the information that really the ACEs study is meant to be completed with those over 18. Not that it can't be done with someone under 18, but I wondered if you have any caution or anything that those of us that are serving adolescents should be aware of from your research that you'd be able to share today.
Yeah, certainly getting this information from children and adolescents is going to be fraught with difficulty, limits imposed by their parents, etc. So one way of circumventing that after fashion would be in a classroom, hey, you guys ever written a play before? No? Well, we're going to write a play today. We're going to learn how to write a play today. Let's write a play about a kid who's growing up in a house where somebody's getting hurt. What's the kid's name? And where's the house? In town or out in the country? And who else lives in the house? And what are they like? Etc. Proceeding down that kind of, this is make-believe. Hey, I'm not talking about me. So there's an advantage there. And if there are parental complaints, we're not asking a child to talk about himself. We're helping him learn how to write a play. This is make-believe, etc. So I think that's the other thing is autobiographical writing. There's a psychologist at the University of Texas named James Pennebaker, P-E-N-N-E Baker. You can look him up on Amazon, who has studied this extensively in medical settings, the remarkably beneficial role of autobiographical writing. And I've been using his ideas for 30 years now, since I first heard about them. And they're acceptable to most people. The most I ever got from a young woman who was Miss Pittsburgh many years ago was 265 pages of single-space typing. But it was beneficial to her and certainly interesting to me. It taught me that one had daughters that one cares about. One does not readily let them into Miss Pittsburgh, Miss Anything contest, lest they be the victims of every lecherous businessman in town. So, it's a useful thing to keep in mind.
Dr. Letty, again, thank you for being here today. My question relates to how widespread are the ACEs being taught in medical schools? I know there are some universities that teach their social work or mental health clinicians about the ACEs, but how widespread is it, and where do you see that going in the future?
Very limited. I speak every year at the University of California in San Diego, and that's exceedingly well received by the students. But there are exceedingly few schools that are touching that. Hopefully that will slowly change. If one of the ideas that I have, sort of a grandiose idea, would be to develop a really comprehensive medical history questionnaire and put it free on the internet. That anyone who wished could fill it out at home, adding their name after they disconnected, and if they wished, print it out and give it to their physicians. Now, I'm not so naive as to think there would be widespread acceptance. The experiment is whether some meaningful minority would begin to see the relevance of that to their practice and start using it and disseminate it that way. But that, I think, would be, a very meaningful approach that could be done successfully.
Our last question.
Okay. I found that in working with children all across the spectrum, the program Conscious Discipline is extremely helpful. It's trauma-informed and it's brain-based, and it helps children feel safe and connected enough to learn. My question to you is, I use Conscious Discipline with like parenting and working with children and interpersonal relationships. And because it is trauma-informed, my question is there any situation in which so I don't know the trauma that these kids have faced, but I have never found it to be unhelpful in any situation, in any relationship. So is there a time that a trauma-informed approach would not be helpful?
Well, it's possible to do anything wrong. When I think back on the scale we have done this, I can't think of a categorical answer to that. Not that comes to my mind. I mean, we've done this now in a multi-year period in one department, in a very big medical center, with 440,000 patients and 0 patient complaints. And, believe me, I've heard about it if it were, because some of my colleagues were surely hoping to see this thing killed, so they wouldn't have to deal with it. The 35% reduction in doctor office visits as a further detail, that lasted 1 year. 2 years later, everything reverted back to the prior levels. And when we look in our electronic medical records, there are our notes printed with laser-like clarity and capably. Essentially, no one touched that information. They're raising the question, well, what would have happened if their primary care doctors or anyone, at least mentioned it? I don't know. It's the right question. So the resistance to using this or to get it in the first place is significant. Anonymity is a big help. Getting it into a school newspaper or local newspaper is a very galvanizing first step. A lot of these things have
at least the questions are coming into being. You know, that's an essential first step in creating any change. You know, what's the right question that we should be pursuing?
Thank you, Dr. Felitti. Let's give him a hand.